Hey guys, it's Chris at Highline Guitars, and it's time for a Luthier's Quick Tip.
If you'd like to help support this channel, visit eguitarplans.com and buy a plan. Now on with the video.
Here's today's Luthier's Quick Tip. Grain filler is not the same as sanding sealer, and sanding sealer is not the same as a tannin blocker. These are different products which have different uses, and that's important to understand if you want to achieve the best possible finish. In last week's quick tips, I tried to explain as clearly as I could what a sanding sealer product is. However, it is obvious to me that there's still some confusion. A lot of folks seem to think that you can use a sanding sealer to do the same thing that a grain filler does, and that you can also use a sanding sealer to do the same thing that a tannin blocking product does, but you can't. They're different. A sanding sealer can be used to prep the wood for the even absorption of dyes and stains. And as you can see here, this is some sanding sealer I poured into a cup. And it has a viscosity that's slightly thicker than water. However, it's thin enough that it can be sprayed with a spray gun. And it's designed to be applied to the wood so that it will soak in. And then once it's dry, you can sand off the excess. Then when you apply your dyes and stains, they'll absorb evenly into the wood. And that way you won't have any dark spots or splotchiness that's common when you try to apply water-based dyes and stains to raw wood. Sanding sealer can also be applied after you've stained and dyed the wood. And what it does is it serves as a fixative. It helps to lock in the color after you've applied it, because when you're using water or alcohol-based dyes and stains, there's nothing binding them to the wood. And that means when you apply your water-based products afterwards, such as your grain fillers, which I'll explain in a minute, or your top coats, they can reactivate the dye and the stain and cause them to start to lift out of the wood. And this really becomes a problem when you're using multiple colors on your guitar project. For example, if you're applying a burst effect using more than one color, say you're using 2 or 3 colors, once you've applied those dyes and stains, if you forget to apply a sealer over the top to lock it in, when you start to apply a product like a grain filler, which is a product that you would apply and move with a brush or a trowel, you could reactivate that color and start to smear it around the surface, and you obviously don't want to do that. So after you've applied your color and let it dry, you can then apply a sanding sealer over the top of that to lock it in. Now, I'm always advising people to use spray equipment to apply this stuff. If you try to brush it on after you've applied your dye or your stain, you could reactivate it and start to move that color around, and that can cause you problems. So it's always better to spray it. Grain fillers, on the other hand, are formulated to have a much thicker consistency. Even though they contain similar polymers to sanding sealers, they're so much thicker. And as you can see here, this crystal lac grain filler has the consistency of pancake batter. And I also have some aqua coat, which, as you can see, has the consistency of cake batter. As a result, when you apply this to the surface of wood, it's going to plug up and fill grain better. Sealers seal the pores in grain, but they don't fill the pores in grain. There's a difference. Sealer seals, filler fills. And if you want an absolutely smooth surface and ultimately are looking to, maybe you want to be able to see the grain and the pores, but you don't want to feel them, you would want to use a grain filler to completely fill them in so that your finish that you're applying is not going to sink down into those pores. So the question that people often ask is, well, when do I apply the grain filler? Do I apply it to the raw wood? Do I apply it after I've put my color on and sealed it? When is the best time to do it? Well, grain filler, especially water-based grain filler, is pretty flexible. So it really depends on what your outcome is. One way that you can use grain filler is you can actually use it to enhance the appearance of the grain and pores. Now, I don't mean the texture, I mean just the way it looks visually. And what you can do to accomplish that is you can mix it with a dye or a pigment and give it some color. So you could actually make your grain filler, as an example, you could make it black or brown or, a dark blue, green, red, whatever. And what you would do is you would apply that to the raw wood, pack it into the grain and the pores, and then let it dry. Then you would go back and sand it off with like a 220 grit sandpaper to remove all of it, except where it's been packed down into the grain and pores. Then you could apply a water-based dye or stain to the surface of the wood, and you'll add color to your wood, and at the same time you'll really make that grain and pore structure pop visually. So that's one way you can use it. Another way you can use it is after you've applied your dye or stain and then fixed it into place with some sealer, you can then apply the grain filler over the top. And what you would do is you would probably either use your fingers, I usually will wear nitrile gloves and then just smear the stuff on and then trowel it off with a plastic card. And an old credit card works great because they have rounded corners so they won't leave marks in the finish. But then you would trowel it off and try to make it as thin as possible. Let that dry and then examine the surface to see if you've filled the grain or if you need to apply an additional application. And you would continue to do this until you've completely filled the grain. But because it dries clear, it's not going to inhibit the color you applied to the wood, and you're still going to be able to see it. If you're going to be painting the guitar a solid opaque color, I would recommend applying the grain filler to the raw wood first and build it up and sand it back until you have a perfectly smooth surface before you start to spray your color. The other product I mentioned is a tannin blocker. Now, unfortunately, it seems a lot of folks tend to think that if you're using sanding sealer, that it blocks tannin. Well, it can to a certain degree, but it's really not formulated specifically to block tannin, so it doesn't always work as we would hope. Now, what tannin is it's a compound that's present in all plant life. So all of your trees contain different levels of tannin depending on the species. Therefore, all the wood we use when we build guitars has tannin in it. And tannin can contaminate your finish. And where it's a real problem is when you're using paint, or it can also contaminate your top clear coats. So what we need to do is we need to try to block that tannin if we're going to be painting a guitar a solid color. And it's also a good idea to block the tannin if you're going to be applying clear coats. So you have to use a product that's specifically formulated to block the tannin, and unfortunately not all sanding sealers are formulated to do that. The product that I use is Crystal Lax. It's not shellac, and this is a good clear blocking sealer that will block the tannin, and that will prevent it from contaminating paint and clear coats and causing adhesion issues as well as spotting and discoloration. So don't just assume if you're using a sanding sealer it's also going to be blocking the tannin. You really should consider a specific tannin blocking product. However, I think that that's more of a concern when you're using species of wood that are known for having high levels of tannin. So you would have to do some research to figure out if the species of wood you're using is high in tannin before you would need to invest in a tannin blocker. Well, hopefully this video will clear up some of the confusion that you might have for these different products, what they are and when to use them. I'll put some links for the products that I use down in the description below so you can go check it out. And if you have any questions about this rather confusing subject, be sure to post them down below and I'll do my best to answer them. And as always, if you like videos on building and repairing guitars, hit that subscribe button, click the bell for notifications for each time I post up a new video, which is usually twice a week. And if you'd like to show this channel's support, head over to eguitarplans.com and purchase a plan. They aren't really expensive, and your purchase does a lot to help this channel stay relevant. So until the next episode, take care, and I'll see you soon.